we are going to talk about psychedelics. The year 1969, the place, the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal, room 1742. The famous bed-in by John Lennon and Yoko Ono, a peaceful protest against war. And in that room, they recorded a song. And it was an ode to peace. Now, of course, Lennon and Ono were heard on that famous record, but there were other voices as well. Petula Clark of Downtown fame, the comedian Dick Gregory, Tommy Smothers played guitar, and also there was Timothy Leary, seen here in the foreground. Yes, that Timothy Leary, the one who had been fired from Harvard University for promoting the use of psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin. And he had become famous with this phrase, turn on, tune in, drop out. Well, that turn on was due to psychedelics. He had been hired at Harvard in 1959 as a professor of psychology, and his original research was pretty standard psychotherapy. And then he happened to take a vacation in Mexico together with a colleague. And his colleague had read an article in a 1957 issue of Life magazine, in which there was a description of magic mushrooms and their hallucinogenic effect. And the two Harvard colleagues became very interested in this and found some of these mushrooms in Mexico, and Timothy Leary's life was changed, as he said. He had seen visions. He thought that his mind was opened up, and he focused his research on magic mushrooms. The chemical in there, the active ingredient, is something called psilocybin, and that was identified by Albert Hofmann, the same chemist who had first synthesized LSD. Anyway, Leary began to do experiments with psilocybin, and at first the experiments were very legitimate ones. He worked on alcoholics. He said he was able to make them give up alcohol. He worked with prisoners, and he said that when these prisoners were treated with psilocybin, they were less likely to resort to crime once they were released. But then colleagues at Harvard began to hear some of the stories about how Leary had been giving psilocybin to undergraduates and how not all of the experiments were totally kosher. And when this was brought to the attention of the administration, eventually Leary got fired. And he became sort of an icon of the counterculture movement of the 1960s, promoting the use of psychedelics. Well, he was castigated in those days for that. Together, however, today, researchers are looking at this in somewhat a different way, because there's a renewed interest in psilocybin and in LSD, especially in the concept known as microdosing, which may have some benefit in helping people deal with mental disease. So certainly, in any discussion of these medications as being potentially useful, one has to bring in the name of Timothy Leary. And, it always goes back to that classic event in 1969, which actually in Montreal is commemorated by a sculpture, a very interesting sculpture. And it is right here on Mount Royal, which is not far from where we're recording this right now. You just walk up the steps on Peel Street up to Mount Royal, and there is this rather curious structure. It's called a sculpture. It's made of slabs of limestone, and on each one is recorded peace in a different language. And that takes us back to 1969 and John Lennon and Yoko Ono's Ode to Peace. And these days, I think it might be a good thing to bring some leaders from around the world here and let them walk over this sculpture and let them reflect on the need for peace.